Welcome back to the deep dive. For those of you who've been following along with us through lexical scope and closure, well, today's kind of the payoff.
It really is.
This is where those, let's say, abstract ideas become really concrete tools for building, properly structured programs. We're talking about the module pattern.
That's exactly right. Our mission here really is to show you how everything you've learned, variable life cycles, nested scopes, closure, it all comes together in, well, arguably the most effective pattern for organizing modern code.
Right.
If you get the module, you really get scope and closure.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Maybe start with the main goals. The things that define a module, no matter the specific syntax we use later. First up is encapsulation.
Yeah, encapsulation. It's fundamentally about grouping things together, bundling the information like the data and the behavior, the functions that operate on that data.
So keeping related things close.
Exactly, like putting all your form validation logic in one file, maybe validation.js, or, even a class. It just co-locates everything needed for that specific job.
And you see that in modern frameworks too, right? Bundling the code, the HTML structure, the styles into one component.
Absolutely. It's the same principle, just applied more broadly sometimes. But the second goal, that's where the scope knowledge really becomes critical. It's the principle of least exposure, PA.
POA. Sounds serious.
Well, it's about being defensive with your code. It's the practice of strictly controlling what parts of your code are visible or accessible from the outside.
You mean guarding against accidentally messing things up?
Pretty much. We talked about how variables just hanging out on the global scope, or even just publicly accessible on an object, can lead to, well, unpredictable bugs, hard to track changes.
Okay.
So the module pattern uses lexical scope, the very scope rules we've been discussing, to enforce this control. It creates private, hidden details and then exposes only a specific controlled public interface or API.
Hang on. If the goal is just, organization and avoiding global scope pollution, why not just use separate files? Modern JavaScript with let and const gives you block scope, file scope.
Ah, that's a really good question. A critical distinction.
Yeah.
Simple file scoping or block scoping with let and const. It gives you privacy while that specific block or file is executing.
Right. Okay, yeah. During execution.
But the module pattern, because it uses closure, gives you something more. Persistent managed state. The unique thing about a module is it creates this long-lived internal memory, the state.
That survives after the initial code runs.
Precisely. And that state is accessible only through the public methods defined by the module. So you get hidden data, that's the PUE part, that persists because of closure. Simple file scoping doesn't inherently give you that managed persistence layer tied to specific functions.
Got it. So it's the combination.
Yeah.
Bundling related things, encapsulation, strictly controlling visibility, especially over persistent state, PUE.
Exactly. And that combination leads directly to the core benefits, code that's easier to maintain, clearer boundaries between different parts of your application, and generally just higher quality code. So let's try a formal definition then. A module is essentially a collection of related data and functions. It's characterized by that split, the hidden private details versus the public API.
And crucially,
it's stateful, it holds onto information, maintains that internal state over time thanks to closure.
Okay, stateful and controlled access. To really hammer this home, maybe we should look at what isn't quite a module, patterns that get confused sometimes.
Good idea. First one, the namespace pattern.
The big utils object.
Exactly. You see this a lot.
Yeah.
An object, say utils, and it just holds a bunch of related functions like cancel event, wait for seconds, ease with email. Useful stuff.
That keeps things tidy.
It does organize things. But notice, those functions are typically stateless. They take input, produce output, but they don't rely on or manage any internal data specific to the utils object itself.
Right. As valid email doesn't need to remember the last email it checked.
Exactly. So it's grouping, which is good, but it lacks that internal managed state. So it's a namespace, useful for organization, but not technically a module by our definition.
Okay, so no state means not a module. What's the other near miss?
The simple data structure. Let's say we have a student object again. It might have an array inside called records. That's the data, the state.
Okay.
And maybe a function like getName that uses those records. So it has state and it has behavior.
So it's closer.
It is closer. But it usually fails on the other requirement.
Yeah.
The principle of least exposure, PWAL.
So the data isn't hidden.
Right. If you can just go student.records.push, new grade, from anywhere in your code, then you have direct, uncontrolled access to the internal state.
Protection.
No protection, no controlled API managing that state. So While it's stateful and groups-related things, it's really just a data structure instance, not a module. We need that access control layer.
Which brings us neatly to how JavaScript first achieved this. The classic module pattern,
Yeah.
often called the revealing module, right?
Yep. The revealing module pattern. And it's built entirely on function scope and, you guessed it, closure.
How does it work mechanically?
It's actually quite elegant. You take that basic structure, like our student data structure idea, and you wrap the whole definition inside a function.
It's a regular function.
Usually an immediately invoked function expression, an IIFE, let's call it define student. So you write function define student, the outer parentheses make it an expression, and the final executes it right away.
Okay, so it runs instantly. What happens inside?
Inside that function's scope, you declare your private data. So var records, or maybe some private helper functions that only the module internals should use.
They're private just because they're inside the function.
Exactly. Standard lexical scope. Then, still inside the IOA, you create an object, often called public API.
Okay.
And you attach only the functions you want to expose to the outside world onto that object. So maybe public API.getName function uses records.
Yeah.
Then the very last thing the IIF does is return public API.
So the result of the whole IIFE execution is just that small object with the public methods.
Correct. Now here's the magic part, the closure. The IIFE finishes executing. Normally its scope would be gone, garbage collected.
Right.
But the getName function we returned on the public API object, it still has a reference back to the inner records array it needs to work.
It does a closure.
Because of closure. So the records array persists in memory, inaccessible from the outside, but still available to the getName function that closed over it.
Yeah.
The state is preserved and protected.
That's clever. So the rule is
Yeah.
anything defined directly inside the IIFE is private by default. Only what you explicitly put on the return object is public.
You got it. And because we used an IIFE, which runs only once?
We get a singleton. One single instance of this module for the whole application.
Exactly. A single shared instance with its own private persistent state.
But what if I need multiple independent instances?
Yeah.
Like managing students for a full-time program and a separate part-time program. A singleton won't work there.
Right. You need different sets of records. For that, you use a slight variation. The module factory.
Factory, like it produces modules.
Kind of, yeah. It's a very small tweak to the code. Instead of wrapping the definition in an IIFE,
You just make it a regular named function?
precisely, you just define function define student. The same inner logic return public API. No immediate invocation.
So it doesn't run right away.
No, it's just a function definition, a factory ready to be called.
So how do you use it?
You call it whenever you need a new instance. var full-time student module define student, and var part-time student module define student.
And each time you call define student.
You execute the function body again. That creates a brand new scope, a new records array inside that scope, and a new public API object.
With functions closing over that specific calls records array.
Exactly. Each call creates a completely independent module instance with its own private state encapsulated in its own closure. It's like creating separate little memory bubbles.
That really shows the power of closure for state management. So the classic module, whether IIFE or factory, hinges on those three things. An outer function scope, hidden state inside, and a public API returning at least one function that closes over that state.
That's the essence of it. And understanding that foundation makes the modern module formats much easier to grasp.
Okay, let's talk modern then, starting with Node.js and CommonJS modules.
Right. CommonJS, very influential. It's file-based, typically one module per file, and architecturally they behave like singletons.
Singletons again. How does that work with files?
So a key difference in CommonJS is that the top-level scope inside a module file is not the global scope.
Oh, interesting. So variables declare they aren't global.
Correct. They are private to the module file by default, very much like variables inside that classic IIFE pattern. To make something public, you have to explicitly export it.
How do you do that? Instead of returning an object.
You use a special object that Node provides within each module file, module.exports. You add properties to this object, so module.exports.getName function.
Okay, so you attach things to module.exports. And how does the singleton part work if I import it multiple times?
That's the module cache. Node maintains an internal cache. The very first time you use require for a specific file, say require.student.js, Node executes the code in student.js, builds the module.exports object, and then caches that resulting object.
Catches it.
Yeah. Any subsequent time you require .student.js anywhere else in your application, Node doesn't rerun the file. It just hands you back the exact same object from the cache.
So one execution, one instance, shared everywhere. That's the singleton behavior.
Precisely. It ensures consistent state across your app. And the functions you exported on module.exports still have their closures over the private variables defined within the file scope.
Got it. And the source material mentioned a best practice about module.export.
Ah, yes. It strongly advises against completely replacing the module.exports object, like doing module.exports OB, my whole API.
You know, it seems simpler sometimes.
It can lead to subtle issues, especially with circular dependencies where modules might require each other. It's safer to just add properties to the default module.exports object. If you have many things to export, use something like object.assign, module.exports, get name, add record, app.
Good tip. Okay, so that's CommonJS. What about the format that's now standard in browsers and Node? ES modules, or ESM.
Right, ESM, the official JavaScript standard. Also, file-based singletons like CommonJS. One big difference up front. ESM files are always in strict mode automatically.
No need for use strict.
Nope, it's implicit, which is generally a good thing, encourages better code.
But the main difference people talk about is import and export, right? Not require and module.export.
That's the syntax, yes. But the fundamental architectural difference is how they are processed. CommonJS require is dynamic. The module is loaded and processed when the require call is actually executed at runtime. ESM, import-export, is statically analyzable. This means the JavaScript engine or build tools can figure out the dependency graph, what imports what before running any code, just by looking at the import and export statements.
Statically. Before runtime. What's the benefit of that?
Huge benefits. It allows for optimizations like tree shaking, where unused exports can be completely removed from the final bundle. It also handles things like circular dependencies more reliably because the structure is known up front. It's a major reason modern web development relies so heavily on ESM and bundlers.
Interesting. So how does the syntax work? How do you export things?
You use the export keyword directly at the top level of your module file. You can't put it inside an if block or a function.
Top level only.
You can export existing declarations like export, get name, add record, that's a named export. Or you can export as you declare, export function get name, or export const records, though exporting raw data is often less ideal than exporting functions that manage it.
And there's export default too.
Yes, export default. A module can have multiple named exports, but only one default export. It's often used for the main thing the module provides, like a class or a primary function.
Is it fundamentally different?
Not really. It's more like syntactic sugar, a convenience. It signals the primary export and simplifies the import syntax for the consumer.
Okay, so how does importing work then?
You use the import keyword, also only at the top level. For named exports, you use curly braces, import get name, add record from .student.js.
Matching the names you exported.
Exactly. You can also rename them during import using import get name as get student name from .student.js.
Handy. And for the default export?
No braces. Import student from .student.js. The name student here is chosen by the importer. It receives whatever was default exported.
And what if I want everything exported from a module?
That's the namespace import. Import as student from .student.js. This creates an object named student containing all the named exports as properties, for example, student.getName. It feels a bit like accessing the public API object from our classic module pattern.
Right, like the public API object we returned from the IIFE.
Exactly. So you see, even though the syntax and mechanics evolved from IIFEs to factories to CommonJS's cache to ESM's static analysis, the core idea remains constant.
Which is?
Using scope to create privacy by default, and using closure to maintain persistent state, exposing only a controlled public interface. That's the module pattern, regardless of the wrapper. It's the most effective way we have in JavaScript to structure larger programs.
So really mastering this pattern is kind of the final proof that you've truly grasped scope and closure. You're not just understanding the theory, you're actively using JavaScript's fundamental mechanisms to build better, more organized code.
Absolutely. It moves from academic understanding to practical application.
Okay, that brings us almost to the end. Do you have a final thought for our listeners to chew on?
Yeah, something to reflect on. Think about the module factory pattern again, the one where each call creates a new instance.
Okay, like define student.
Right. Since each call creates a new instance, and each instance uses closure to hold on to its own private state, what does that really mean?
It means they're independent.
They're independent memory capsules. Each call to the factory doesn't just create an object, It creates a distinct, persistent chunk of private memory managed entirely through the closure of its public methods, completely separate from any other instance. That's not just organization, that's intentional, powerful memory management using the core features of the language. Think about how fundamental that is.